Welcome to the Best Places to Lead show. I am your host, Jerry McNamara, and I'm grateful that you have joined us. So we have a super fun guest today, but before we get there, I am on a mission to positively impact 5 million people. Now it's over the next 4 years because we're already a year into the mission. I like the trajectory up and to the right. But here's the point. I've never met anyone who showed up to work and said, you know what, I really want to suck today. And yet there are plenty of people who show up to work and they're ineffective in their role. It's my experience that it's not their fault. It's our fault as the leaders of the organization when we haven't created the clarity of how they win, that they're challenged by the work that they're doing, that they're comfortable, that they have the tools, time, and training to be successful. And the last piece that I find to be maybe the most important is, are they cared for by you as their leader? Do you actually give a shit about them showing up? And so to me, that's why we're here. We're better together. And Tyler's going to talk to us a little bit about his approach to running businesses and his journey in doing that, because I think he has really unique insights. And so because we're better together, right? I think about things in whole people. You can't separate the person from the profession, right? They show up as whole people. And what I really found is when we're good at home, we can be great at work, and we're good at work, we can be great at home. And so that's really the pursuit here of making sure that leaders are prepared to lead, to create that clarity across the organization so that all of us can live better, more fulfilled lives. So fun stuff. So today I have Tyler Pigott from Fir Creative. That's a really hard thing to say, is Fir Creative. I don't know why that is, but I practiced a number of times before we get on. Now, Tyler, listen, I get to speak to a lot of people. Not a lot of people. I get to speak to a number of people who are interested in being on the show. We turn a number of them away because, the message has to be right. But the thing that struck me, and I was sharing this with you before we went on the air, I was just so taken by your energy, your calmness. There's just this, there's an energy about you that I thought was terrific. And then in addition to it, I thought you were really smart and you had really great insights about how you think about business, how you think about your priorities and living a really good, purposeful life. And so thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I thought when you started that off, I thought you were going to just say, hey, I wanted to publicly say you didn't make it on the show, which is fine. So I'm glad I made the cut. No, this is going to be a fun conversation. And thank you for the compliments. We've talked a couple times and shared some, I'll call them almost war stories or stories that have developed us into the people we are today. And I've had numerous of those. So I'm excited for the conversation, and hopefully I can leave any sort of value or help people along. And my goal is to make it so that people don't fall on their face as many times as I have, maybe at least just one less. That would be great.
One less. I said, if I've already had my teeth bashed in, you shouldn't have to do it too. So
ideally,
share the insights. But trace for us, your path, how you traversed, some corporate work, going to become a college golf coach, which I love that, to now running Fir Creative. Okay, trace that for us so we have some more context.
Sure. So, kind of grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So as part of my family started a business, the vocational training school back in the 80s, kind of late 70s, 80s, ran it through the 90s and the early 2000s, essentially training people how to use computers, because that was, if you think about that time frame or that era, computers were being introduced more kind of widely into the workforce. And so there was 500-600 employees kind of at the top, 9 schools, I believe, kind of Northern California, all the way up to kind of Northern Washington. So I live on the West Coast, or grew up on the West Coast. And so got the opportunity to see all the ins and outs of how a small startup to raising money to small business to medium-sized business. I think kind of the peak was maybe like 35 million in revenue. So started to get up there from a size of business, which was awesome. So anyway, kind of learned through that. I would say I've always had an entrepreneurial bone. So I paid my way through college as a DJ. So DJ'd corporate events and weddings and parties and all sorts of things to pay my way through school. And I still, to this day, this literally happened to me last Sunday, And I ran into somebody and they said, "Hey, you remember when you DJ'd our wedding?" And I have no recollection. I've done so many of them, I have no recollection, but it was funny that it kind of came back, 25, 30 years later. So went through that. I got a degree in communications and broadcast, thought I wanted to work in television and television studios and that kind of thing, but didn't really want to move to LA or New York, which was where the majority of those jobs kind of still are, but were for sure at that point. And so got into broadcast. I worked at a big production studio in Seattle area, did national televised commercials, all sorts of fun things back when you were shipping VCR tapes to radio stations. So that was actually not that long ago, but from a technology standpoint, it's an eternity. So in the midst of that, I got to build server farms. And so if you think about animation, most animation kind of started maybe like early 2000s-ish. If you think about Pixar and some of the first movies, and you'd need a ton of like computer horsepower to be able to create those moving pictures and one 2D image into the next to the next to the next. And so kind of just figured out how do you wire all these servers together and make them work into one kind of like supercomputer, which then kind of sparked the next adventure of my life, which was a little bit of like nights and weekends for a bit, and then got hired away to the corporate side to do some tech work and some technology work. But really my passion was telling stories. And so, which was kind of through the media and broadcast and camera and digital video work that I was doing. And so pretty quickly morphed into the corporate side where I was helping a couple of different companies launch brands, and then ultimately worked for a big investor group, which was a huge, from a learning standpoint and challenge standpoint, was an unbelievable learning process, because I got to work with many different names that I'm not much of a name dropper guy, but y'all would know who they were from all over the place. So anyway, so that was fun, learned a ton about that. But one of the products that I most recently had worked on with them, which was about kind of like 2011 through 2014, launched a consumer beverage product up and down the West Coast. And I was traveling a ton. And at that point I had little kids and was missing out on stuff. And so I swung the complete opposite direction. I use the word swing because it's a great transition to becoming a college golf coach. So I left.
The obvious next step in your career.
Yeah, totally. It's like the next stepping stone. Yeah, exactly. So I became a college golf coach at that point. Really, I became one of those because I didn't quite know what I wanted to do next. Didn't want to move for a job. Wasn't finding anything where I was at. And so anyway, I started getting side contracts and all sorts of different things, which led to starting to build a group of people that uses the internet to help brands make tons of money. So I run a marketing agency now. So that was I hopefully like less than 2-minute version of my history. But
what caused you to make the jump from, okay, but I'm a college coach, now let me go do this for myself because I really love storytelling. How did you overcome that fear? Because I think fear holds people back. Like, oh my gosh, I have kids, I have a house, I like all of these things. And the story we start telling ourselves is, well, I can't do that, or it'd be irresponsible for me to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that there's probably like 5 different answers for that question for me. But, one of them is I was around an entrepreneurial family. And so most entrepreneurs or founders are risk takers. Like that's kind of their deal is they inject risk into situations. And so that was probably one of them where I was willing to take that risk. And I didn't really think of it as a risk. Like I look at it more as an opportunity and what I could possibly go out and, and win kind of for myself. Mm-hmm. So it's less of looking at it with kind of how you described it a little bit as a little bit of like a fear-based kind of outlook where I'm afraid that I might not achieve it, where I was probably more looking at it around the opportunity, like what's possible because I could go do this. Sure. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect on that. There are days when you're like, oh crap, is this really going to happen? Or am I going to make it? Or, all those things as an entrepreneur or a founder of something. So, but yeah, I would say I probably just looked at it from those lenses. And then kind of secondarily to that, I built a little bit of a name around some of the things I was doing. And so I had people reaching out to, hey, can you work on this project? Or could you work on that project? And I naturally needed to figure out how do I pay for, a mortgage and food on the table and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a little bit of a motivator from the financial side to jump into something that maybe could be a little bit more, allow me to provide for my family and pay bills and stuff, at least in the early months. So
I think it's an interesting distinction because, I've been the brought in CEO. I've also been the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And, neither of my parents were entrepreneurial. And it scared the heck out of my mom when I
Yeah.
started a business. Like, oh my gosh, son. And, I laughed because there's a spot on the highway where I remember telling her that we had made the Inc. 500 for the second year in a row. And she
Yeah.
went from like, congratulations, that's amazing, son, to immediately telling me, make sure you continue to work hard. There's now a lot of people counting on you. And
Yeah.
so, I think in that mindset, I've never met a person, an entrepreneur starting a business who's like, yeah, I think this is going to fail. Let's go do it. And yet there's still plenty of angst of like, oh my gosh, how do I make this jump over into entrepreneurship? And, it is amazing how our minds kind of can get in the way. And one of the things that I was struck by, when we talked was, you know, you have this happy-go-lucky mindset, this energy about you, but there's a real focus that you had, and you talked about your faith and your family and your wife, right?
Yeah.
And so leading a company and managing priorities can get really, really hard, right? You're pulled in many different directions. What insights can you provide on making sure you keep first things first? How do you do it, or what is your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think probably for most people, I'm just trying to think of like tangible things, like takeaways that I've kind of stumbled into, I suppose. I would say one is like a mindset of constant efficiency. And so I'm always trying to learn different, techniques around how can I cut out kind of the fat, if you will, cut out the things that don't really matter and the things that I don't need to spend time on or that are waste my time or whatever. And sometimes it's really hard to see the A and the B, or the differentiation between those two things. But I bring that up to specifically, that as you grow an organization, I would say, like, I kind of oftentimes describe it in like the Google Calendar or the Apple Calendar or whatever, and you have those little time blocks. Well, you started and you had lots of white space, and then pretty soon you didn't have any white space, and every meeting led to the next one, and you were in meetings 30 hours a week. And that happens to me. It happens, I think, probably to most people, hopefully, or they're listening to the call and whatnot. But like, even looking at that from an efficiency standpoint and going, cool, what can I cut out? Do I need to be part of all these things? And oftentimes it does point to me in like an ego or a control, or I need to be involved in all those things. And so when you start to just look at your life or your schedule or whatever, and you look at it with more of a, how do I cut things out of it and only say yes to the things I actually want to say yes to, without saying no to the things I really should be saying yes to, I think that's helped a ton. So I'm always, the amount of, I laugh at it, but the amount of T-charts, if you all are familiar with T-charts, but just as like straight line down the middle, straight line on top, and then you're literally going, that's comparing. So you've got one side that's a positive, one side that's a negative maybe, and you're going through those. And I'm constantly doing those things. And I'm constantly asking people on our team, like, what am I the bottleneck on? And it's funny when you find that out and you go, oh, I don't need to, you actually don't even want me at these 7 meetings. Oh, perfect. Like, this is great. So I think it's just like a willingness to be okay passing trust and passing control off to either somebody else, or being willing to let a ball drop or a plate drop, whatever analogy you want to use.
Yeah.
Because all of that sets up the ability to actually make the choices you want to make. And so I have this, I'm looking, because over the top of my door, I see, or the top of my monitor, I see my door, and I have all these, posters and things I printed out. And one of them just says, what matters in 20 years? Like, it's just with a big question mark. And I've talked to a ton of people. I'm always trying to talk to people that are more seasoned than I am, because it doesn't always mean they're older than I am. It's just more seasoned than I am. And, I kind of ask what matters, what do they think about, what are the things that they wish they maybe have like grudges for, or things that they regret, or whatever it might be. And pretty much no one ever says, man, I just spent too much time with my kids. I really wish I would have spent less time with my wife. Like, no, I've never heard anyone say that. And so most of the time, you get to, if you build a relationship with people that are close to you, you do want to just keep spending more time with them. Like, it's just that there's a purpose to why you connect and what's important. And so I think I've tried really hard to also just, I have kids and I have teenage girls now, and I can count on one hand how many years I got left with one before they move out. And so, it's kind of one of those like, oh, I want to make sure, vacations, I actually unplug and I put my phone in a drawer and turn it off. And, I actually have time in the evenings or time when they're around, or I want to drive them from this place to that place. And so I just say all those things as kind of like, I've got, a lot of things and pulled lots of different directions, but it is about, you're the one that controls your life, and being able to like actually think efficiently and reprioritize all the time and constantly look at what's important and what you're being pulled in which directions to. I think it's worth the energy it takes to do that, whether people do it or not, it's worth it. So
I always say, if your thoughts, your feelings, or your actions aren't serving you, then change them. You're the only one that can. And
yeah,
I think that starts with just a real conviction of what's important to you. Because like what's important in 20 years. I think about things in terminal states. Like if I'm 75 dying on a hospital gurney in the hospital, what do I want people to say about me? And I'm really clear about what those things that I want them to say are. And I just try and live my life in alignment of those things. And certainly I'm a fallible human and I miss the mark, but that North Star for my life just creates a great opportunity to say, here's the life that I want to live. It's my life on my terms. I think that's the highest and best use, not living it on other people's terms or more. And now that society tells you, like, keep on chasing this thing. And I think you just articulated it so well. Like, you only have a couple more years left with your kids. I've got 7 left with my daughter. I think, oh my gosh, what do I have to teach her in 7 years? Because if I'm in my office working, I'm not teaching her something. And I think that's a really great reminder in the process of doing that. One of the things that we do sometimes get sucked into, and you were talking about it, is time on your calendar, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly it goes from having nice white space and you're thinking and you're strategic and you're creative, and then suddenly 30 hours in meeting back to back to back to back to back, right?
Yep.
You shared a strategy that you use. You were just talking about T-charts, but to get you into a space where you were only working on things that you liked and that you were good at. And you were talking about how you did that over a period of time so that you could operate in your unique ability, which that's truly the gift, if you can get that alignment. Can you share your approach of how you did that? Because I've shared that 5 times since you shared that with me. I was like, this is brilliant. Watch this. Can you share that for the audience?
Yeah, I think it's fun because you've said numerous times on this, you use your words, I had an approach. So I'm just going to say that this is my thing and I created it. No, I think it's kind of pulled from a lot of different things, a lot of books and all sorts of things, but it is literally back to like just the efficiency mindset and trying to, get the things off your plate that maybe you're not great at. And so if you kind of just, people who listen to watching, if you just think about, like a plus sign, and it's got 4 different quadrants to it, right? So you've got an upper right, an upper left, and a bottom right, and bottom left. And you just kind of put in each of them, the top, like, let's see, this would be the top left on my side, says what I'm good at and what I love doing. And then to the next part, it's what I love, but I'm bad at. And then in the bottom, it's what I hate and I'm good at. And then there's one that says what I hate and what I'm bad at. And so you just kind of put like those headings on it, and then make a list of every single thing that you do. So from, picking up your kids at school to maybe, making lunch plans or schedule meetings or paying invoices or whatever like literally make a list of everything, to client meetings, to sales, to put everything on there and be pretty specific. And then from that list, just start pulling them and putting them into the quadrants. Like literally just go, I'm good at this and I love doing it. Okay, cool. It goes up there. Man, I think I'm good at this, but I hate this. Okay, cool. It goes in there. I probably suck at this and I hate doing it. Awesome. So it goes in there. So then, doing that on a regular basis. And then I really tried hard in like early years of kind of untangling myself from all the different nitty gritties of the business, is to try to really the things that anything that was in the category I wasn't good at. So either I hated it or I loved it and it was in that category, was to try to move it off my plate.
Yeah.
So early days was, find a contractor or a service or a personal assistant or whatever, to then kind of go, oh, I'm not great at these. I'm not great at these. And I think everybody understands the topic of like, operating in your sweet spot, or, kind of functioning in your gifts or your talents or whatever you want to call them. But very rarely do I see people actually doing things that make it so that they actually can operate in those kind of gifts or talents. And so this was kind of my version, I suppose. And I think Stephen Covey has a version of it. All the questions sometimes are a little bit different. I think there's many of them out there. So giving credit where credit's due. But the real kind of trick of it for me was I did this every quarter for the first 3 years I started a business. And it just was on a project management, like it came up as a task on the last day of the quarter. And I then went through this exercise and then tried to continually push off, what am I good at? What am I good at? What am I good at? And some seasons I'd get feedback. I'd just go, hey, am I good at this? Like, shoot me straight. Tell me if I suck at this or I need work on this, or because oftentimes, we think we're good at everything. And then you realize actually maybe you're not great at it or something. And so that was a great technique, I guess, for me to just, a lot of it is headspace and a lot of it's getting yourself in the right headspace. Mm-hmm. You obviously still have work to do and you still have to maybe pass off some of those things. And it forces you to come up with some systems and processes of how you do them so that you could pass them off. And there's tons of work that it might create, but it's pretty hard to duplicate time. Like if anyone's figured out how to make a 36-hour day, I'd love to know.
I'm into it.
Yeah, totally. We're all, limited by that. And so really what I'm talking about is how you're prioritizing your time. And I think the last piece on that for me is when you're making that list to kind of distribute in the midst of that, those kind of 4 quadrants, put everything in there. So anything from a date night with your spouse or partner to picking up your kids, like I mentioned, or making them lunches or doing bedtime routines, put everything on there. And obviously I'm giving my age of my kids off because of the things that I still do with them, but it helps because it's really hard as a founder or an entrepreneur to separate. It's all the same for me. It's all functions the same. And so anyway, that was a really helpful technique for me for several years. I still do it here and there, depending on, what I might be trying to get in or out of. And I think it's, if people, I think I have on my website, which I think will be in some notes or something we send out, sure, but I have a kind of downloadable of how I do that. And I think I call it what you're good at or something. It's got a name to it, but it was just really helpful for me. So if anybody wants to have that follow up.
I think it's amazing because, I get to work with senior leaders a lot. I've been a senior leader. Yeah. And you end up in spaces where you're like, I don't like doing this. I hate doing this. And so it just falls off. You don't quite get to it because, never makes it to the top of the to-do list. And I don't believe that you can be world-class in things that you don't like. And so we shouldn't be doing those things. Let's find the person who that fills their bucket and let's hand that gift over to them because it is a gift to them and it's a burden to me. And so distributing those things and getting back into your place where you can be really great. I love the framework that you had laid out to do that. Super fun. And I love the discipline of doing that over time, continuing to iterate because, sometimes we do it once and then, the business continues to evolve and change, hopefully continues to grow. And, your role and your demands continue to change over time too. So.
Yeah, I think what is helpful about doing it over and over again, I think in a business sense is when you're starting it. I started this business I'm in now fully bootstrapped. So it's me and I grow a profit. I use the profit to hire somebody and repeat. And I've done that, I don't know how many times at this point. One of the things that helps though is I remember early on, just to give a practical example, I remember early on saying, oh, I'm not the greatest at maintaining things. And so I can do it, but I don't love it and I'm not great at it. So it kind of fit in that quadrant. So what it meant is I'm not as effective at client work ongoing as others might be. Yep. And so then quickly I said, I need to probably bring in some, strategists and account managers and those types of things. And that was great. That was a great move. And then I quickly realized, I can't really keep being productive if I'm the catch-all. So if they have a problem with that client, it now comes up to me. Well, that problem didn't exist before I had those people. And so now it's like a new thing I spend time on that didn't exist, that wasn't on my, kind of quadrants, the previous kind of quarter or 6 months earlier. So I just say that from your life changes, your responsibilities change, situations change, economies change, families change. And so your tasks or what you put your time and energy into can change as well. And so I think that's one of the benefits of doing this exercise on a somewhat regular basis. Do whatever you want, but it does make sense because it does keeps your life cleaned out, if you will, of the things that maybe you aren't great at and shouldn't spend your time on.
I continually remind myself why I've spent 25 years behind a desk, because I am the least handy person that you will ever meet. I ran a construction business. We grew really fast. And I would tell people the only thing I hammer is my keyboard. I don't even, put pictures up in my house. My wife does that. And so, know your sweet spot. So now let's talk about it. You have people now in the business, right?
Yeah.
And I really believe that the role of a leader is to help their people make engaged, agile, and autonomous decisions, right? Which means we have to be super clear about what we're trying to achieve, the tools and resources that they have, just all of those things, right? And so, as I was getting prepared, you wrote a little bit about activating employees by empowering people, and you had some steps in doing that. Can you share some of the thoughts that you had? I thought your thinking there was really inspiring, and I'd love for you to share it.
Yeah. Now this one's always really funny to me because, like when you're starting a business and it's usually you're jumping off a cliff a little bit, to hire a first person. It's super intimidating. And like, if I've asked tons of people, why are you intimidated about it? Every single one of them says at least one of, if not the main thing is, oh, it's a lot of money. Like it's the salary. And it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And then they might jump off that cliff, they hire that person, and then you kind of are stumbling through the decision-making and stuff. And I love it because if I literally sit here and I say, all right, Jerry, you spent a lot of money and you hired this person. You asked them to focus on this problem and they spent 100x more time on this problem than you did. And now you make the decision. That doesn't make any sense. Like it literally doesn't make any sense. Like you hired someone to become an expert. You spent a bunch of money, you took some risks there, you outlined it, you aligned on a common goal and a plan, and then it comes back to you and you have to be the one. Like that's just it's kind of odd. Like
right.
You're not going to make a great decision probably because they are the experts in that. And so I'm not saying I'm perfect at that or haven't been over the years, but I think from a process kind of framework standpoint, it's really a lot of it's just the ability to trust and build trust both directions with people. And I think I probably naturally trust people. Some people don't. Some people are naturally maybe a little more skeptical and have to earn that trust, and that's great. That's okay too.
Yep.
But I think like that kind of process to where, really delegating those decisions. I've always found that like high performers, they want the ball. They want to take the shot. They want it in their court. They want like the decision-making abilities. They want autonomy. And they might be more of a junior staff member, but they still are high performers. And so give them maybe smaller decisions. When they're a senior, person and maybe a little more experience or something, they get bigger decisions. And so I think it's okay. That's what people want. I think there's naturally a little bit of kind of fear potentially with some people of not wanting the weight of maybe the risk or the repercussions or whatever it might look like. And then I would argue that comes down to culture and how things are handled when something might go well or not well. And I've always kind of said, hey, make room for success, but also like in parentheses and failure, right? Like there's a possibility that, when I had the first 10 clients, I probably lost a couple because I didn't do a great job. Then expecting perfection from a staff member probably is a little unrealistic. I get why people want it, but so I don't know. I think that's kind of like the gist of that kind of framework, if you will. But a lot of it's just how do you design projects to where, some people, hey, give me my punch list or my task list. And I'm more of cool, I'm going to give you your guardrails and what I hope that the results at the end look like. And so that's kind of like I guess the concept of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
can you maybe give us an example, something recent where you were able to give someone guardrails and what the end result was supposed to look like? Because I think that's super powerful because leaders won't give things over because they're a control, and at the heart of it, there's a lack of trust, right? For an end result. How do you get people over that hurdle? Because I was talking to someone this past week and they were talking about their role and their inability to give things up. Yeah. And I said, you do realize that will limit your career if you can't get to a place where you can give things up, because it's just only you. You're going to be an individual contributor, and that's great, but your opportunities to grow inside of the company, because there are other very capable people to do things to help you so that you can take on bigger challenges. And I do see this as a place where, people could grow. What is your idea of like guardrails and results?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question because I naturally don't give things up. Like, so, if some people don't know who I am or how I function, like it would be, oh yeah, he's just really easy go lucky. Like, not a chance. You kind of have to pry things out of my hands. But I've spent a lot of time trying to understand, like, what is that act? Like, okay, why is that? Like, why do I have a hard time with that? And what it usually boils down to is that if you pass something to someone and they don't actually take it, that's the challenge, because they're not doing the activities, the behaviors, whatnot, to show me that they actually have it. That could be, reconciling a P&L, that could be managing a client, that could be closing a sales deal. It's all over the board. But until that person, like a salesperson's a good one, is a good example, because most people, founders, people starting things, they're selling, like that's part of their job. And when I was hiring kind of like my first salespeople, until they go close a lead, or go find a lead, go find a prospect, work the sales process, send the contract, get it signed, it gets kicked off, and I've never met them and I didn't even hear about it. Once that happens, I go, okay, cool, I can trust. Great, you took it from me. I do not need to be there. But until that, if they're just going, oh, I made the contract. Oh, okay, well, I did all the rest of this. So you're still in it. You can't give it up yet. And so part of that's being aware and identifying that. And then like being very clear in your guardrails of what the behaviors or activities are that you kind of expect to have success in this thing. And so sometimes it's really easy to like make the list of here's all the things I want to pass off. But I would challenge people to go a little bit more to what it actually means. Like, what does success actually mean for each of those tasks? So you're outlining those things so that person has a chance to succeed. Because so often we don't take the time to outline or communicate. And so I'm going to pass this thing to Jerry, and then he comes back to me and says, hey, I did it. And you're like, man, this just doesn't seem right. Or I would have done this differently. And then you're like, well, actually they did it fine, but you probably did not communicate far enough or in depth enough to communicate what you actually wanted.
Yes.
And so that can take time. Like, that takes time to constantly evolve that process, or what that looks like. A quick shout out. Dan Sullivan has a book, Who, Not How. Mm-hmm. And it's a great read for people trying to learn how to delegate, pass things off, hand things off. And he has something called the impact filter in there. And it really is about how do you outline a project of, what does this mean for the company? What would it mean if we did it versus not doing it? And what are 5 things of success that, you could outline or list? And you kind of really, it gives things out of your brain that help you create those guardrails. So I don't know if that makes sense or is specific enough, but that's kind of like the concept behind most of it. So
I love that. We'll make sure we find that and get that in the show notes as well. I think, coming back to your point, without clarity, there can be no accountability.
Yeah.
Because if I haven't been clear enough, there's no way that I can be like, oh, well, Tyler, you didn't do a good job. I wasn't, clear enough. And so, last month I did a deep dive on decision-making, try and take a leadership competency. This month I've been doing execution and productivity. And so one of the things that I've been starting to float, and I'd love to float this by you, is execution comes down to tools, time, training, talent, and tenacity. So the first 3 are, do I have what I need? Do I have enough time to do it? And have been taught how to do it, right? Okay, those are all fixable, right? If those are fixable, you got to look at talent. Does this person, are they talented enough to actually do this? Do they have the intellectual horsepower? And then, tenacity, do they give a shit enough to say, like, I'm going to make sure this happens because it's on my plate. And, that last one's a bit of a problem if one doesn't have tenacity to bring it to the finish line. When you put that in the scope of like how you're empowering people, does that measure up for you, to that thinking?
Yeah, no, I think it does. So if you're familiar with the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, it's get it, want it, ability to do it. Yep. And it's very similar to kind of your kind of 5 different aspects of it. Yeah, I mean, it is really consistent. I think one of the things that I've tried really hard over the last number of years, specifically as our team's grown, and a lot of it's been I'm removed. I don't manage everyone, and so I kind of manage like 3 people and they're all VPs and they manage everybody else. And
Yep.
and I think one of the things that I've had to challenge myself to do is really figuring out a way to put myself in the shoes of the whoever I'm talking to. So the shoes of the listener kind of concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when I ask somebody to do something, or you lay out a project or an initiative or something that's going on, really making sure that they have what they need. And so the having what they need is, if I say, hey, you have a full-time job and I'm just going to throw this huge project on top of you, like oftentimes people are intimidated to ask questions. They're intimidated to inconvenience. I just need to look good or whatever it is. And so know the people you're managing well enough, first off, to be able to understand maybe how they might be processing that information.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation last week with one of our directors, and she tends to really grab things, hold on to them, and keep running. And she's got an unbelievable capacity. She does an amazing job on things, but yet we're really and doesn't complain, and and so you don't really know what's actually happening until you start to dig into what's going on. And so I think really what that is like that desire to be that like an empathetic or servant leader. And so what that is going to tell you is that, hey, I need to like go serve this person and understand what's going on. And man, they seem a little overwhelmed by this. And so why are they overwhelmed? And how do we get them the resources they need to actually be successful in this project or this thing or whatever the heck that I passed them? So I don't know, that'd be the only thing I'd add to it, would just be that, like, I have a pretty detailed dashboard of everyone I manage, from how they handle stress to what they're afraid of, to when things get muddy or whatever, like how they were going to react to that, to who they manage, to their initiatives. I look at it every day.
How did you get all of that information? That's really interesting to me.
So anytime I have like a one-on-one or a meeting or something, I just call it my staff dashboard. It's super simple. It's literally a Google Doc of a, sideways landscape, and it's got a grid on it, and this person's name and yada, yada. And there's some things when you're really starting to, like, now that I think I've built a couple teams at like 60 plus, a couple at 30 plus, one at 50 plus. So, I'm hundreds into hiring people. So I've built this over the years, but in the first few conversations, I know the right questions to ask because I'm kind of filling out a little bit of a grid. But then then there's some pieces on there of like the one about how they handle stress that I'm constantly updating, because that piece is like, because we talked a little bit earlier about mixing kind of like, personal, professional, and it's the work-life blender, not the work-life balance, to steal a Jay Owen line that he's using to talk. Like I'm pretty convinced of that's just what it is. And because I think like if someone's going through a hard time at home or family or friends or something's gone sideways and they show up at work, they're not 100% there. And neither are you if something like that happens. And so I think the ability to understand when someone's stressed about something, to help them, and this is a little bit like therapist or counselor, and I don't think that's my role at all, but you kind of need to have a little touch of it to be able to understand like when someone's processing something. Or, I know one of our directors just needs space. They just need to come back in 24, 48 hours and they're great, but they're going to be pretty overwhelmed and have a hard time. Like, you can just tell they're internally processing it, which is great. But not everyone's wired the same as you. You don't want them to be wired the same as you. And like really being a student of personalities and emotions and how people are wired, to understand, how you're going to actually present things to them and then help them through them. So I don't know if any of that makes sense, but I've always kind of been that way.
I love that idea. It's one of the things that I say to people: if you're annoyed by people, you probably don't want to be a leader. You probably should stay in the individual contributor role. And that's awesome. We need lots of individual contributors. I love to lead. So that's what my bias is. However, like if you think people are annoying, you can't actually take an interest in them. You can't care about them. You can't have that level of compassion. Jeffrey Weiner, from the former CEO of LinkedIn, he talked a lot about compassionate leadership. It's beyond empathy. It's not just recognizing that you're having that problem. It's saying, how can I help? How can I be a part of doing something to get you to a better place? That's really more service than just recognizing that you have an issue on the empathy side. And I love that framework that he had shared in that concept. But getting to know your people, and I say love your people and treat them as whole people. That's my first value as a human being. Everything just falls into place when you do that stuff. It's pretty amazing. Two last ones. What's one thing that you have learned over the course of your career? You were saying we've had lots of opportunities and contexts and bumps and bruises. What's the one thing that you would want to share with a senior leader to say, this is the thing that you need to know to be successful?
I mean, okay, I'm just going to give you the first thing that comes to mind because it's probably the thing that for me personally has been challenging. I have no idea if anybody else is going to relate to it, but I've spent a lot of time having seasons of business and life kind of be ruined by the amount of worry, anxiety, and maybe fear that I've had about, oh man, if this doesn't work out, what's going to happen? And all those types of emotions. It always works out. It really does. Like it might mean you lose a company. It might mean you downsize to half your size of staff. It might mean you lose a deal. It might mean, but it always works out. Like it really does. And I think part of that's because probably if you're listening to this call or this presentation or whatever we call it, this discussion, likely you've got some sort of desire to improve. You've got some sort of desire to go out and get stuff, and you're motivated and driven. Well, that's not going to go away. It just means that it might take a couple of days or weeks or whatever to reset or, and so I think like that would probably be the one thing is like, if that's something in your life that you struggle with, whether that's that worry piece, anxiety is usually mixed in, fears mixed in, it's kind of all one big disaster. But I'd figure out how you can like have systems in your life, processes in your life, tools that you can lean into, people you can lean into that help pull you out of that, because that's usually it's going to make the season longer that you're in. And you're going to have a lot more challenge with some relationships, probably. Likely you're not going to show up your best because you're, emotionally pretty tapped. And so I'm saying all these things out of experience, not a book I read. Like I have a lot of different things I do to help through those seasons. I would say like,
what's the top thing that you do? What's the one thing that you do when you say like, man, I'm in this season, I'm worried, I'm anxious. What's been that coping mechanism that's helped you like springboard out?
Yeah, a couple of them, but all under one kind of topic or theme, and that's perspective. Yep. And fight for perspective would be the one thing. And that works differently for lots of people. I mean, sometimes for me, it's go for a run and listen to music. Sometimes it's have a conversation and just unload everything. Sometimes it's journaling. There's lots of different things. And I feel like in different seasons, it's different things. But I would say overall, it's that fighting for perspective of maybe what's actually going on. Or, I think in business, I would say the perspective being most of us hear the news, read the articles, all those things. And oftentimes the only things that are highlighted are kind of things that make you scared, because those are usually what sell. And so pulling away from those types of things is helpful. But again, it's just fighting for a perspective of like reality of what's going on in your own life and then fixing it. And so it could be hey, we're burning too much from an expense standpoint. We need to cut some staff or expenses or whatever. And you just got to do it. Like, don't think about it a ton and don't take your emotion out of it. If it's people, you're changing someone's life a little bit. And, but at the same time, again, back to just fight for perspective, because that usually helps. It's why I have a sign over my door that says what matters in 20 years, because usually that brings perspective of like, oh my word, I still have an incredible wife. We live in a great house. We have an incredible community. I've got great kids. Like,
it's all good.
Like, it's kind of like, I know it's not, and I'm not trying to, put light at people's challenges or problems. And we could go off on a whole nother season of Netflix, probably between you and I, of the different complete disasters in life that have happened. But I think that usually that perspective helps kind of like, I guess, ground or root me in that right kind of scenario.
I share your enthusiasm. I'm such a nerd, Tyler, that my favorite word in the English language is perspective.
I love it. Yeah.
I am a big believer that the wider and deeper perspective you cultivate, it's directly proportional to your quality of life. And so intentionally putting yourself into situations where you can go like, geez, I was wrong. I didn't think about that. I had blind spots. And it's why our family loves to travel. And we, I believe in that so much, because when you say, oh no, that's my way of thinking, but it's not the only way of thinking, and being able to fight back to say like, oh, interesting. That's another way. Am I really seeing the world as it is? Well, no, just through my own lens, and that's okay. But I think that's super fun. Let's finish with this. What don't I know enough about you to ask that I should have asked you?
Oh man. What don't you know enough about me that you should have asked? I mean, I can come up with, I guess, a couple things. I'm about as disciplined as it gets. So
Okay.
I am kind of one of those guys that operates with kind of less than 6 hours, maybe 5 hours a night. I work out pretty much every day. I used to race Ironmans, and that was fun for me. And I did that on the side. Like, so from a discipline standpoint, like I'm a pretty disciplined person. But at the same standpoint, I would say I come across somewhat laid back usually. And so it's a little bit of a weird like tension, probably in my own life and for those around me. That'd be one thing. The other thing is I love music. So I go to live concerts and events as many times as I can a year. I have a Sonos system throughout my house, and it plays music from 7 in the morning till 10 at night, and it changes genres based on like what time of day it is. So I think last year, like my Spotify account was like at 279,000 minutes or something like that. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So, I mean, I love music. I love like building, like, I guess a little bit of an atmosphere, kind of moment, like where it's, you're like have a fun place you want to be around and that kind of thing. So I'm drawing blanks, I feel like, of like how to answer that question.
It's a tough question, right? Because
Yeah.
we just met, and I say like, what's the thing that I should have asked you that I didn't? When you think about discipline,
Yeah.
would you say that that's a hallmark of why you've been able to create success?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that we talked about has a level of discipline throughout it. It's got, like even going back to that, little grid, that deal where you kind of do that exercise of what you're working on. Like, I mean, I'm doing that on a regular basis. I remember, the only reason I have a company now is because most people in the creative space will land a gig, they'll work on that gig, they'll come up for at the end of it and kind of have a little bit of, oh crap, how am I going to make money next month? And I literally, like growing up, you're not growing up, starting the business, every Wednesday afternoon was sales, and pretty soon it was every Wednesday was all sales, and it was prospecting, proposals, sales meetings, and it did not matter how busy I was because I wanted to eat in 6 months. And that was like the whole purpose. And so all of that's discipline. Reality is it's all discipline, because so much of it you don't really know, like, okay, if what I'm working on now is that a guarantee that I'm going to get the result I want? Well, no, it's none of it is. So I'd say like it's a pretty big aspect of it, whether like I throw, physical fitness and stuff in there. Part of that's just, I think it's fun and I really enjoy that aspect of life. And so that makes me a total nerd, and that's okay. I wouldn't always classify that as the discipline side of things. But yeah, I think most people that I talk to that have been quote unquote successful from a business standpoint, made a ton of money, grown companies, whatever, big teams. That is a common kind of attribute to each of those people, is the discipline to stick to it. Because I think that our culture always talks about more, and our culture wants you to drop whatever you're doing and go chase whatever it is that makes you happy. That's great. Like there is an element of that that's awesome, and I'm not here to tear it apart, but I do know, and I've lived enough life to go, man, not every day is like that, and there's not a chance that it's ever going to be. And I don't think it's supposed to. I think there is supposed to be, mountaintops and valleys, and you learn a lot in the valleys and get to enjoy it, and not, like that kind of illustration. So I think discipline helps you get through a lot of those things, whether it's, activities or things you're doing to kind of bring yourself out of them or whatever. So yeah, I think it does.
I think you're 100% right. Discipline and focus, that to me is everything. And again, the conscious intention to know what you should be disciplined and focused on, so that you can actually create the success and live your life on your terms. So
yeah.
Really good stuff. Tyler, people want to connect with you. What are the best places for us to find you?
Yeah, for sure. I live in Gig Harbor, Washington. Come visit in July and August. No, I'm just kidding. LinkedIn's probably the best spot. I'm the most active from a social platform on LinkedIn. Search my first and last name, you'll find me. I think my picture on LinkedIn has the hair length I have now, so you should be able to identify. LinkedIn's a great spot. Our website for our company is called Lone Fir Creative, for like the fir tree, Lone, LONE, lonefircreative.com. Tons of content on that. See the rest of what we do, what we focus on, and such there. Those are probably the two best places to, if people have questions, reach out, give me a thumbs down. If you didn't like it, I learned from that too, or reach out with questions. I'm happy to meet new people. So
me too. Well, I thought you were terrific, and I'm really grateful that you were able to swing in and share your lessons and wisdom. Super fun. So for me, I'm on this mission, and one of the things that I'm not really good at, Tyler, is asking for help, because I'm one of those doers, those high achievers. So you can't impact 5 million people if you don't ask for help along the way. So if you like this show content, please rate the podcast, share it with a friend, connect with us on LinkedIn. That's the only way, because we're always better together. I really appreciate all the help so that we can become the PT Barnum of leadership. We'll just keep on bringing people forward, Tyler. Listen, next week I have Dave Melenda. He's a CEO who exited his construction materials company, wrote a best-selling book on growing on purpose, and really realized that he didn't grow on purpose when he had his company. And I thought that was a really fun conversation. Sold his business to his partner. So we're going to talk about partnerships, conscious intention to building business. I think next week will be a fun conversation too. And I hope you guys can join us. Tyler, again, thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It's fun.